Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the account of a meeting between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson last week, which, according to the Sunday Times, was either an epic exercise in trolling on Sunak's part or a serious miscalculation. Either way, it almost certainly explains why exactly Nadine Dorries resigned in a rage on Friday. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So there were several aspects of the sudden resignations of Nadine Dorries and Boris Johnson in particular, which we could work out from the chain of events as known, but it still left a few blanks. Why exactly did Nadine Dorries resign? What was the significant information that she alluded to? Well, according to an account in the Sunday Times, which draws on statements from both Sunak's and Johnson's aides and allies, Johnson had a meeting with Sunak to clear the air. Now, I will point out that the article is written using statements from both Sunak's and Johnson's camps. Not everything will be strictly true. Some of it will be the truth as these people understand it, but it may not be the truth. Some of it will just be downright lies. So I'm going to focus on what I think is the most likely to be true, knowing the background and what is verifiable. So a meeting took place. They began apparently talking about how Johnson was prepared to campaign hard in the red wall for the Conservatives at the next election. Now, I am going to say, because this is important for the context, if anyone believed that, I would pity them. Despite Johnson trying to present himself as the betrayed victim, he is a vain, petty narcissist. The very idea that he would go out and energetically help make Rishi Sunak look good in the election by being an electoral asset is for the birds. Bear in mind, when he stepped down, Boris Johnson said he intended to be an energetic supporter of the Conservative Party from the backbenchers. He turned up like, what, 4 or 5 times since then? He will have sounded positive about the prospect because he knows it's the only thing of value which he has by way of leverage over Sunak. You know, Boris Johnson in some areas may be an electoral asset for the Conservatives. But Sunak, as naive as I believe him to be, cannot be so stupid as to think that a promise from Boris Johnson is even worth the oxygen used to make it. The conversation then turned to Johnson's resignation honours list. Now, Sunak had apparently already said ahead of the meeting that he didn't want to discuss that. And he said it again in the meeting when Johnson brought it up, but Johnson insisted. Of course he did. That's why he came. He didn't go there to say how he could be of use of Sunak. That was just leverage. Any talk of his input for campaigning was, as I say, an obvious lie. He wanted to know that his resignation honours list would go through because Sunak had the power to block some or all of it, and there had been a lot of pressure for him to do so. What happened then was Sunak suggested that he would not interfere with the list. Boris Johnson took that to mean that his list would remain intact. But it seems that Johnson didn't actually understand how the honours system works, and he failed to understand that people other than the Prime Minister can remove names from the list. Say officials, for example, they can fail vetting. So he knew that the original plan for the MPs nominated for peerages to defer until after the election wasn't going to work. See, I did a video last month. If I knew it, Boris Johnson knew it. I did a video last month explaining that the House of Lords Appointments Committee said that it's not possible to just defer it. They either had to stand down or they had to say that they will stand down in the next 6 months to take up those positions, or they had to reject the peerages. Boris Johnson was of the view, however, that Sunak just needed to keep putting them through the vetting process as many times as necessary to eat up the remaining time in the Parliament, and that is a sort of fiddle that allows them to be deferred. But this is not how it works. Frankly, I'm amazed that Johnson could ever think this is how it works. Maybe his advisors are as bad as Sunak's. But what it meant was that when that meeting ended, Boris Johnson went away thinking that Nadine Dorries and co were getting their peerages. But when the list was published, Nadine Dorries and the 3 other MPs, all thinking they were on the list, were shocked to discover that they weren't. Dorries approached Downing Street and told them Johnson assured her that she would just be put through vetting, and she was told that Johnson had no business giving her those assurances. Now, I would say Dorries really shouldn't have fallen foul of this either. If I could find out what the committee had said, surely she would have read the same articles or been aware of them. But she's not the brightest of buttons, our Nads, so we have to make some allowances. She was told that she either had to have already stood down or signalled her intention to stand down to the House of Lords. She asked if she could still do that, if she could just stand down and be on the list, and she was told no. Of course not. Sunak didn't want her on the list. Now, at this point, I'm going to have to correct something. See, with the fast-moving things last week, I made an awful lot of assumptions. So, for example, I said before the list was published that Rishi Sunak must be mad not to have removed those MPs from the list because it would trigger very damaging by-elections. And then the next day, they weren't on the list, and I assumed Rishi Sunak had blocked them. And I thought, right, okay, showing a bit of backbone. He's blocked them. But he hadn't. I assumed that Sunak interfered to remove those peerages, but he hadn't done that. Obviously, when the Prime Minister blocks appointments, the House of Lords Committee has to publish that it was the Prime Minister who forced the removal from the list. And they hadn't published that. So Sunak is able to say, no, I didn't block it. They were just removed by dint of the fact these people hadn't stood down or signalled their intention to stand down. So officials automatically removed them from the list with nothing to do with Sunak. At the same time, I also said at the time that all Sunak had to do to smooth things over was to say that he would give them those peerages next year. And then it's fine. He doesn't have the by-elections. They're going to stand down. They then go straight to the House of Lords. Because that's actually quite normal. It's normal for MPs who've given some service to Parliament of whatever type, who they stand down for the election and then they go straight to the House of Lords. That is all perfectly normal. But anyway, the point is that Sunak can truthfully claim he did not interfere with the honours list. So he hasn't lied to Johnson. Anyone removed was removed by officials, not him or his team. But Johnson and his allies have cried betrayal. But they are still right to do so. Because Sunak may not have directly blocked the appointments, but he knew that Johnson, as well as the intended recipients, thought they were getting them. He deliberately allowed Johnson to believe that they would be going through. Now, if he'd been honest, Johnson would have tipped the nods to Dorries and the others that they had to signal their intention to step down in order to be restated on the list. Obviously, Sunak didn't want to do that. So Sunak did indirectly prevent those peerages. But did he prevent them in order to stop the by-elections? Well, no, because that doesn't make sense now. Apart from anything else, he's ended up with 3 very tricky by-elections on his hands. In fact, it's quite amusing. Another bit of, unrelated news in some ways. A Tory MP who was a very strong candidate to be the Tory candidate for Mayor of London has not been allowed to go through to the shortlist. And I've seen people suggesting, is this because Rishi Sunak, because the person in question has a very vulnerable seat and Rishi Sunak can really do without that by-election. They've been wondering, has he blocked this person? He'd be a very good candidate because he doesn't want the by-election. And I had to say, well, if Rishi Sunak's trying to avoid by-elections, he's a funny way of going about it because he's got 3 here. You know, when I urged him to block them last week, as I said, all he had to do was offer those the peerages next year. That's all he had to do. Everyone would have been happy. According to the report, Nadine Dorries even asked Sunak to do that and was told no. If he'd agreed, she would not have resigned and he wouldn't be stuck with this by-election. Johnson seems to think that Sunak has done this in order to get rid of both Johnson and Dorries out of Westminster. Now, in a sense, you can see how that's possible because the bottom line here, Sunak has been very shady. But there are a couple of things which don't make sense. Actually, I suppose there's like 3 things that don't make sense. First, Johnson's resignation was entirely based on his impending Privileges Committee guilty verdict. Now, that is something he blames on Sunak, But that is another aspect of the article where distilling the truth from the various statements. I'm not even going to do a video on that because it's all just hearsay as far as I can tell. I don't know the truth of it. Second, Dorries wasn't really in Westminster anyway. Like, if Sunak, he didn't have to get rid of her at Westminster. She's turned up like 4 times since Johnson stepped down as Prime Minister. She was certainly no bother to Sunak in Westminster. The only bother Nadine Dorries has been to Rishi Sunak is giving speeches attacking him at the Conservative Democratic Organisation conference or, you know, on her GB News show. But she can still do that outside of Westminster. In fact, she's free to be even more of a pain now. And the third thing is, Sunak is now faced with problematic by-elections, like a very tricky by-election in Dorries' Bedfordshire seat. You know, Sunak should still win it. Yeah, he should absolutely win it. But it's not guaranteed. I mean, if he wins, okay, it's a win, but it's a safe seat. What does he want? A round of applause? But if he loses, he's lost a very safe seat when he reckons he's winning back traditional Conservative voters. Well, guess what? Traditional Conservative voters live in places like mid-Bedfordshire. If he loses it, he loses his claim. All in all, if Sunak was being cute with Johnson in order to get rid of a couple of bothersome MPs, it does not seem like a sensible move because they were not being a bother in Westminster. He's lost 2 MPs from this because we can't count Johnson himself, but they weren't, Nigel Adams, Nadine Dorries, they weren't being a bother. Not in Westminster anyway. That is the point. Not in Westminster. They weren't leading any rebellions against him. I mean, can you imagine Nadine Dorries leading anything other than a conga line? This is a situation that has done nobody any good. It's not done Boris Johnson any good. It's not done Rishi Sunak any good. Johnson has let down some of those who kissed his arse in return for promises of peerages, who now have nothing. Sunak has left himself with the headache of unwelcome by-elections, and who knows how the party membership is going to view his antics at the conference time this summer. I don't think Sunak has sacrificed the chance for Johnson to be a campaign star for him in the general election, as Johnson's allies will be claiming, because he was never going to do that anyway. But he has allowed Johnson to now claim that. He's allowed Johnson to not go out campaigning for the Conservatives and to blame Sunak for it. You know, Johnson wouldn't have done it anyway. At best, he'd have turned up as pissed as a fart to Sheffield Hallam, only to be told he's picked the only seat in England that's between Labour and the Lib Dems, with the Conservatives not even in the running. But it is not immediately obvious how Sunak thinks the end result of this has benefited him, unless all he wanted to do was childishly screw over Boris Johnson in a move which is just cutting off his nose to spite his face. So that at least explains what happened to Nadine Dorries. It now fills in the blanks. The big question remains what on earth Rishi Sunak was thinking, because I'm missing something. I have to be missing something. I can see no benefit to Rishi Sunak here. But there we are anyway. That is what seems to have happened. That explains a few things. If you read the article yourself, you can get all sorts of impressions about what may have happened. But do bear in mind, it's not always easy to tell which accounts are true and which are not. I'm sure that whoever's written the article has presented them in good faith, but we don't know the authors of the original statements are. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.